founder of Imagine This Women's Film Festival. Just wanted to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. This is our 8th edition of Imagine This Women's Film Festival. Right now, we're going to ask everyone if they can just introduce themselves and tell us what was the inspiration behind their films or projects and what led you guys to this particular story or concept. Maren?
Cool. Hi, everyone. I am Maren Lavelle. I'm the director of Wendy. My husband, who plays Mr. Hansen in the film, he plays like the inspiring theater teacher, wrote the film back in like 2018 or something like that, before we even started writing and producing together. And we had it on the back burner for a bit, but for him, he grew up in the 80s and 90s where, you know, there were all these big in your face over the top love stories for cis straight white men. You know, if you just hold a boombox over your head and go for it, you can go get what you want. And so he's a teaching artist in New York City in real life, and he wanted to write a script that reflected that for his queer students. So he wrote Wendy about a quiet but imaginative queer 8th grader who's attempting to summon the courage to approach her secret crush while she's stage managing the middle school production of Romeo and Juliet. So that was the impetus for him for writing it. And then as far as moving into production, he wanted to film a scene as Mr. Hansen for his reel. And I kind of put the pieces together in my head that if we went to my alma mater, a performing arts high school in Wilmington, Delaware, if we worked with their 8th grade theater students and cast them in the film, we could get the run of the school and make a really cool, authentic piece. So that's kind of how Wendy, the film, came to be.
Oh, that's really interesting. And you said that he wrote it 2018?
Yeah, he wrote it back in probably end of 2018, early 2019, because we didn't start collaborating together until mid to late 2019. So yeah, it was just kind of it was originally supposed to be the impetus for an anthology series about stage managers in New York City. We had a project called Thank You 5, where we were bringing all these different writers in. Everyone was going to write a different stage manager episode. And Wendy was like the initial offering of, hey, here's something, you know, a template for how you could write an episode. And then with COVID, that project was too big for us to produce with so many moving parts. So Wendy just kind of went on the back burner until 2021, when we realized, you know, everyone was vaccinated and we could get out there and make it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. And let me see. Arij, let me know if I'm pronouncing your name right.
Yeah, Arij. Hi everyone. Nice to meet you. I am the producer of Beneath a Mother's Feet, and director Ilyas is also here. I think for me, I'm naturally drawn to female-led stories as a way of understanding my life and finding my place in the world. So when Ilyas brought his story, which was originally a feature film, to a development workshop, I just kind of immediately got hooked and was kind of clung on to the idea of kind of just exploring what it means for a mother to leave her children. I think it's a kind of a completely, people are very blasé when fathers or men leave their children and family. There's a completely different ball game with women making that decision. So I was just immediately fascinated to explore what that would mean. And so we kind of embarked on this journey to make this short film with the hope of eventually making it into a longer piece. Yeah.
And did you guys know each other prior when you approached her?
Yeah, Ilyas and I interacted on a different production, on a commercial production. He was in post, I was an associate producer. We just kind of interacted a few times, just sorting out edits and ADRs. And then during the pandemic, fate brought us into this development program. And then it's been a wonderful collaboration ever since. You know, Ilyas and I have many projects in the pipeline. and we hope to continue working with each other. So it was one of these coincidences that I really value, to say the least.
And I would love to ask you, sorry if I pronounce your name incorrectly, Elias, how did you go about wanting to share this story? Since it's personal and it's based on a true story about your mom.
It's Elias. This question is for Elias. So it's based on his mother's story. So I'll
thank you, Alice. So I started writing at the beginning of the pandemic. That was my sort of entryway into sort of creative writing, and I think it's taken me a long time to get to the point where I feel like I'm able to even explore the idea of a creative life. But my mother, who's Moroccan, had lived a sort of quite an interesting but yet traumatic early life. She was married very young, at the age of 13. She had 2 children by 15, and she found herself divorced as a young mother, living back with her parents. And one day she took the fateful decision to just walk out of her life, which meant that she left her young children, my half brother and half sister, behind. And that story has always been recounted to me as something that was sort of like, how could a mother leave her children? But then I kind of wanted to advocate for her in some way. I mean, so the title's inspired by an Islamic hadith, "Heaven lies beneath the mother's feet." I've got it on my wall here, which was a stage, like a set prop in the film as well. But I wanted to sort of, the title itself, "Beneath the Mother's Feet," is kind of based on the hadith, but it sort of has a double meaning. It's sort of about, a mother who perhaps doesn't necessarily want to be a mother, and that's something I think transcends geography and culture. What does it mean when a young, also I didn't want to sort of play into this stereotype of based on the sort of geographical location and the culture and everything, play into this idea of like child marriage. It's a contemporary story, it's set today. And I was more interested in the idea of maternal regret, what it means when a woman who lives in a particular society is sort of forced into a position, into marrying, into taking on that role of motherhood, when perhaps she never wanted that for herself. And then what it means for a mother to walk out of her life and leave her children behind. So it's kind of a tribute to all, like, the Moroccan women are very strong women. They're known for being quite, they're strong characters, but there are still these societal sort of parameters in which they live their lives, and if you step outside of that, you're almost treated as a pariah. And so it's sort of a tribute to my mother. I just kind of wanted to, so the film is essentially just exploring the kind of the 24 hours leading up to that moment of departure, what that must have looked like for a mother who loves her children deeply, but also is forced into an impossible sort of situation where she either stays and has no life, or she leaves and leaves the 2 people she loves most in the world. So I just wanted to explore that difficult dilemma, really. And then Adij and I, we met. It felt like the stars had aligned because we turned up to this development workshop, and Adij, because my bread and butter is working in post-production, and then he was the producer on a show we worked on together called Baghdad Central, which is for a show set in Iraq it was for Channel 4. But then Adij was like, "Why are you here, Elias?" And I was like, "Adij, you're one of 6 people on this development program." So it just felt like serendipity, really. And we've had incredibly fruitful and like synergistic, is that a word, a relationship ever since. Like, we've just been so aligned in our in our thinking on with regard to this film, how we tell the story, our aesthetics, everything really was just so perfectly aligned. So it was really like this film would never have been made without Arige's input and support, really. So yeah, I'm incredibly thankful to her.
Oh, that's interesting. And one last question for you. Has your mom or any other family members had the opportunity to watch your film?
Yeah, so my mother's seen the film. The first time she saw it, she cried, and then once she finished crying, she was like, "Next time, make a comedy."
Have a follow-up.
Make stuff about me, make it funnier. I was like,
It's a good film, though. Very touching.
"Oh, thanks so much."
And you, Mara?
Hi. So Among Us started with some doodles, actually. Someone had posted a picture of a click beetle on Facebook, and I was like, what is that? And then I was like, oh, I think I have to draw this. And so I started drawing it, and then I was like, what kind of bug? So I did a little research and found out the kind of bug it was, and got very interested in bugs that use automimicry to kind of hide, in plain sight. And so I started drawing all these bugs, and this is about 2019. And I had just been diagnosed with chronic migraine. And I was having some monsters going on in my head, but also living in our world and watching the news and being a mom and being concerned about the world and sending my kid off to school every day, and being a feminist and just watching the world, just watching everything going on. And so I was doing all these doodles, and I was doing a lot of writing. And I kind of realized as I was doing this kind of activity that just felt fun, that these were actually characters that I was going to turn into little paper puppets, and then I was going to animate them. And it took me about 4 years to really think about and figure out what it was that I really needed to say in this piece. And it is very much a reaction to social, political, environmental, upheaval that we're living through every day. Yeah, that's what the piece is about, that monsters, well, at the time when I started it, and still now, monsters live in my head and create havoc in my body and in my life. And this is why I didn't make it to the brunch on Sunday morning. I felt really bad, but I woke up in my hotel room with a migraine. So
Sorry.
that it wasn't that I didn't want to be there. I just was in pain. And recognizing those monsters in me, and then seeing the monsters in the world, just became something that I just needed to say, just needed to talk about. There are still things I need to talk about. So I think there are going to be a couple of parts after part one.
How did you get, what kind of bug is that actually?
So let's see if I can remember all the names. So there's a click beetle, which is like the black, it's a black bug, and it's like vertical looking, 2 big eye spots on the top. There's an owl butterfly, which is the really pretty butterfly one. There's a moth, which I don't remember the name of the moth. There's the swallowtail caterpillar, which is the caterpillar for the swallowtail butterfly. And that's the one that looks like, looks like this. I'm drawing in the air. It's like it has a taller head. And there's something called the Petrolata ocellata. Unfortunately, I'm not a biologist or an entomologist, so these names are foreign to me. And then I forget the other ones. And that the Petrosata ocellata, I think, is a sea creature, so it lives in the water.
And I noticed that throughout the film, you had the whispering voice. I guess that was intentional to make it more creepy.
So sometimes I've found through the years of being an artist and doing my work that sometimes necessity makes things happen in a way that kind of works, so like a happy kind of accident maybe. And so I knew that I had to have all the writing that I did sort of informed what I was, the speaking, the whispering. And so I knew that I had to have that as like one of the soundtracks to the piece. But I hate my voice. And
Okay.
so I hate it. It's so hard for me to hear. And so I knew it couldn't be me speaking, because then I'd never be able to watch it. And I thought, my daughter is very involved in theater at school. So she's a stage manager, and she was at the screening on Saturday, and she loved Wendy. So I was like, oh my God, this is like the perfect film for her.
Sure.
And so I was like, oh, and she has all these theater friends. I was like, maybe I can get a theater kid to do it. And then it was COVID, and I was like, yeah, that's not going to work. So how am I going to do this? I was like, I guess it has to be me, but I'll whisper so it doesn't sound like my voice. And what I didn't realize, that it sort of made the piece more intimate and more creepy. It draws people in a way that I think maybe just a regular voice wouldn't have. So it worked out pretty well. So that's how I got to the whispering by accident.
Yeah, it did work out. Yes, it worked out. And Michaela.
Hi, I'm Michaela Chinaski Holland. I'm the director of Reimagine Volume 2 Mahal, which is actually a virtual reality animation experience. So it's not a traditional film that you go into the theater and watch. You actually put on a headset. And in that VR headset, you are fully immersed in our 3D animated world. The project is 6 dimensions of freedom, which means you could walk through the actual environments if you wanted to, stand up and walk through them. But because the camera movements in VR are so intense, we always recommend people are seated, and we let them enjoy it like a cinematic experience. The VR experience is linear, which means once it starts, you don't do anything like video game-like to make the narrative move forward. Very similar, like a Disney ride, you get on the Disney ride and the ride takes you from start to finish. So does our film. So I would identify this as a film, but I just always make sure people understand it is in virtual reality, which I think also lends to a little bit of the background of storytelling that I have. I come from a immersive, interactive storytelling, nonfiction documentary background. So a lot of my work when I first started in this space was with Time Magazine, thinking about their first VR projects. Also worked with a lot of nonprofits like United Nations, the New York Public Library, Games for Change, Nobel Peace Center, and Reimagine Volume 2 Mahal is my first foray into narrative. It's the first time I've ever had to sit and write a script. It's the first time I've ever had to sit and really think about character development, because we're usually, when I work in a nonfiction or social impact experience, I'm working with a community of people and we're co-creating their stories as we go. This was very interesting for me because I felt very isolated in my creative process. That being said, though, Mahal is a deeply personal project for me. I'm Filipino American. I identify as mixed race. And the reason I created Mahal was because when I came out as queer to my family, which is a very Christian and Catholic conservative family, I realized that I had Indigenous knowledge that was lost to me. And so I decided to go into my Google and find what the original Filipinos thought and believed about queerness. And it sent me on this journey of learning really my history of colonialization and imperialism. The country of the Philippines is actually named after King Philip. It's an archipelago of over 100 islands that were never meant to be a country. There's so many rich indigenous belief systems there. There's so many rich indigenous dialects there. Some are slowly dying. Some are still vibrant, depending on what areas of the Philippines you're in. And so when I started to dive into these cultures, I realized that they had their own rich mythology that I could never encompass in one story. So what I decided to do was I decided to focus on the Tagalog tribe, who believe in anthropomorphic gods. So gods that are very similar to the Greeks and Roman type gods. So they believe the sun is actually represented by a godlike human, and the moon is represented by a godlike human, like an Apollo or an Artemis. And to me, that felt very first floor, entry level, because I love mythology. I love Greek and Roman and Egyptian mythology. And I said, how beautiful is it that my culture not only has these gods and goddesses in their belief system, but also as I started to do more digging, I realized a lot of the spiritual advisors, a lot of the leads of these tribes that were leading the ceremonies, they were leading the traditions, they were leading the oral storytelling of that time, were often female identifying or trans women. And in that way, I sort of uncovered more and more history of queerness and acceptance of queerness in my culture. And so when I actually sat down to do the project, I knew I wanted to do Philippine mythology and specifically Tagalog mythology. For me, again, as a nonfiction storyteller, I had a really hard time figuring out what exactly these characters would be doing and saying. And so I decided to work with my executive producers at Meta to really unlock what it was that would resonate with me. And after a lot of conversations, we realized that my story of losing my father when I was young and that story of grief was a really poignant way of transitioning people into the Philippine mythology world, because there is a creator god called Bathala, very similar to Zeus. And then the cast of characters we have are Apalaki, Mayari, Tala, and Hanan, who are all gods and goddesses of some celestial object like the sun, the moon, the stars, but they're all siblings. And so really what we decided to tell was a story about familial trauma and familial grief, and how each individual person in the families deals with grief, and how grief can not only be something that's very isolating, but also something that can be very communal. And the final part of our experience is the fact that it's not just these gods and goddesses grieving that is the risk, but it's the risk of them grieving that puts the mortal realm at danger constantly, because one thing they do in their realm directly affects the mortal realm of villagers that they were meant to watch over and they're meant to protect, and it's sort of like their legacy and heritage of their father. And for me, growing up without a father, I think I can identify with a lot of that. What is the legacy of my father? Am I putting the legacy of my father at danger with the way I'm acting right now? Is the way I'm acting acceptable? And so, yeah, I hope you get a chance to see even a trailer of it. I'm really proud of the project, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk more about our experiences as storytellers.
Very interesting and fascinating. You were at the hotel, the opening night party, and you had like the VRs set up. We had a small booth, and attendees and filmmakers also had the the opportunity to experience your short project, which was really wonderful. And I have to say that I never heard prior to this. I didn't know about the mythology world in the Philippines. So that was really interesting. And thank you for sharing that. If you guys can share like a memorable or behind the scenes moment from making your film or your project that stands out the most to you. And anyone can answer.
Yeah, for me, such a huge part of this experience was working with the students and returning to my alma mater. So I had graduated from the school 10 years prior when we went back to film. And it's a middle school, there's a middle school portion and a high school portion of the school. So we were working with their 8th grade theater majors. And I just really wanted to, kind of in the spirit of why my husband wrote the film for his queer students, I really wanted making the film to be about providing that experience for the students, because I went to that school and there was such a big emphasis on theater, which was amazing. But I didn't really learn or realize how accessible filmmaking was to me until I graduated college and several years after at that. So I wanted them to know, like, you have a camera, an insane camera in your pocket. You could go out and make this. This is what it feels like to be on a professional film set. This is what it feels like to make movies. So I just wanted to provide them with that experience. And it was really beautiful. I was like walking around the hallways and there's like photos of me from, a decade ago when I was attending the school. My senior photo is like in the background of the classroom scene when she enters to talk to Mr. Hansen. I think my dog is also up in the corner there. And so, just walking around and having all those memories and being like, wow, like I'm back here and I'm back here at a place that really informed my early artistry. And then I'm kind of giving back to that community as well. And then just working with the young actors was really special. I hadn't worked with actors that in that age group before. And it was so fun. I had a great time working with them. I found that they just brought such a really lovely authenticity to their performances. And it allowed me to kind of like work with that baseline, but then craft what I needed from them. throughout. So yeah, it was a really beautiful, wonderful experience.
Was it their first time in film?
Yeah, it was everyone's first film set. And also it was 2021, so it was a mostly virtual school year that year. Typically at that school, you would have like 5 to 8 in-person, performances with your peers, which is a big part of the arts education experience at Cab Calloway School of the Arts. And this was actually their first time performing in person together because everything had been over Zoom. So that was really cool to have them have that experience, to introduce them to film. But then also, so many of those students identified as queer folks. And so they were very vocal about how happy they were to be a part of the project and to be giving, putting a spotlight on, young queer people's experiences as well. So yeah, it was a cool collaboration.
Great. Anyone else would like to share their experience with that?
I guess I can. Sorry. You want to go ahead?
No, go ahead.
Well, I think for me it's just to remind all directors not to work with children. You knew I would say this, and yes. No, really, on a more serious point, the little girl in our film, I don't know if you've seen the film, was absolutely amazing and really kind of made our job easier. However, the younger boy, the toddler, was still breastfeeding. And we had his mother around all the time, but I guess even the little separation caused him anxiety. But I think in the end, this worked to our advantage because we were trying to paint a picture of an anxious mom, a mom that's kind of very loving, but she's not really enjoying motherhood, as it were. So it was one of these elements where you kind of turn the bad into your advantage, and it kind of worked to a certain extent. And the other thing I was going to say is it was amazing just by talking to several of our crew members and cast who largely were non-professional actors to learn how the story resonated with them. And certainly it mirrored some of their life stories. So a lot of them were either adopted or had been left by their mums, or they had to look after someone else who had been left by their mum. So it was quite eye-opening to just understand and get a sense of the scale of this and how very little it's talked about, actually. No, not just in Morocco or Africa, but just across the world, really. Yeah, those two things. Yeah.
Say that Adi, during the filming, Adi's was, she had a producer's hat on, she's carrying the weight of this project on her. So it was a very sort of professional scale of film I turned up in Morocco thinking, like we're just going to make a little short film, but it was a full production. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. But so Adi's was, it was just so funny because she was so busy, like focused on the job at hand. And Rawan, who is an incredible little girl, like she's a polyglot. She speaks, I don't know how many languages, Fusha, Arabic, Darija, English, fluent in English. And she was just so bursting. One day she came up to me and she was trying to chat to me as I was, we were talking production and the next scene. And she was like, "Hello, is anyone home? I'm talking to you." And I was like, I love her confidence. There were lots of lovely moments like that. But I was going to signpost the beach scene, because I'd actually written that in the script, and it was with the waves coming in as the mother sort of looking at the ocean. And we arrived at the location, but the tide was going out. I was like, that's okay. Like, well, we have something. It doesn't matter. We have to compromise all the time. And I'd also written into the script that there would be the sound of the adhan, the call to prayer, happening at the same time. And I was like, guys, we've missed the light. It's okay. Let's just go. We'll call it a day. It's fine. We'll deal with this. We'll make something. And then at that precise moment when I was I'd given up hope, the tide came in, and And then the adhan started, the call to prayer started, and that was something I was thinking we'll just do that, add it in post, the call to prayer. And it was such a euphoric moment, and everybody was like, what's happened in this moment? And the sound recorders was like, he just couldn't contain himself. Yeah, it was a really special moment. I'll never forget it.
Does she have acting background?
Nisreen, the little girl, Rawan, I don't think so. No, I don't think she'd had any acting background, but we met her. She was the only child that we didn't, because we were doing castings from the UK with Morocco, and she was the only child who on the day during those virtual meetings wasn't able to attend for whatever reason. But when we touched down, the casting was like, she's available if you do want to meet her. And I was like, well, we kind of already have somebody lined up. But we met her in person. I was like, she is our little girl. She is Bushra, So
She did a great job.
incredible. And that there's a scene at the dinner table where she's like, Mama Shrab, like I want a drink. And that was just off the top of her head. I was like, that was incredible. I couldn't have asked for more. She was so good. Yeah. Natural.
And very good story about the background. Who'd like to go next?
Well, Michaela, you wanted to go, so you can.
I'm just going to be echoing everybody else here. I think one of the most special moments for us in Mahal was the fact that we got to hire Filipino and Filipino American voiceover actors. And for all of them, they were like, all of the Filipino Americans, they're like, this is the first time I actually get casted in a narrative to be a Filipino. And even the voiceover actor based in the Philippines was like, this is the first time I've ever gotten to see myself as like a god or goddess, right? Like, so I think there was something really special there that connected them to the project in a way that I don't know they were even expecting. And it's also been really special. I know we're supposed to be talking about production, but it's also been really special to have certain people go through the experience and come out of the headset and feel really moved, whether they identify as Filipino or not, but also the folks who do identify as Filipino being like, I didn't even know these stories existed. Like, I didn't even know these gods and goddesses existed in our culture and in our legacy, in our history. And then I think another fun part of the production with virtual reality is always like, you're basically breaking things to make them work. And we used a platform called Quill, where you hand paint and hand animate in virtual reality. So even our storyboards were made in VR native. So our animators were not working in Blender. They weren't working in Maya. They weren't working in Unreal or Unity. Like, no one was on a computer working in 2D. We were always inside the headset. We were always sketching things. We were always blocking things in the 3D spatialized world. And Quill is a very special platform, and you can do a lot with it, but you have to have it tethered to a computer so that the computer can kind of power Quill. The sticky part is when you get into optimization, when you're trying to export your build for these like tetherless headsets, these consumer grade headsets that don't run when they're tethered to a headset. The computer is inside the headset. So it's basically like taking like a huge movie that runs on like all of these like datas and hardwares and computers and exporting it for a mobile device, right? And like, how do you export that? And in Quill, you have to do something called optimization. And from the beginning, everybody was like, you're not going to be able to have 4 fully animated godlike characters, 2 fully rendered environments, a whole group of villagers running down the beach during the chaos scene. They're like, you're just not going to be able to do it. And I was like, well, what if we just try? And so I think a big part of the production that we saw that was really cool on our teams and was just the ability to say, why don't we try? And seeing how much more we could get out of the platform versus saying, well, we couldn't do that, and trying to pivot. And I'm really proud of the work that my Quill team did. It's some of the best work I think that has ever been seen in Quill, just given the technical like heaviness of the project.
And also, there's not that many women in VR, so I would love to hear a little bit about what the experience has been for you.
Yeah. I mean, I always say this to folks who ask me that question or something of that flavor, is that my hope is that being in this space is about not only setting the precedent and having people say like, oh, it's interesting you're in VR, but to make my presence in this space a norm. Like my hope is that like being here right now is like an opening for more women, more queer folk, more Indigenous folks, more folks who identify on the fringes of marginalized societies to say like, let's get involved in this emerging technology now, because some of the reconciliation we're seeing happening in film and theater and video games and other storytelling platforms, I think for me to work in XR is a privilege because we are such a burgeoning industry that there can be a change in the way that we approach XR storytelling. We can be just as female-led, just as female-empowered, just as queer-led, just as queer-empowered, just as Indigenous-led, just as Indigenous-empowered. As we want to see those industries be, we can make and set that precedent now in XR and VR and AR. And for those who don't know, virtual reality, VR, augmented reality, AR, and then XR, extended reality, is the umbrella that all of these fit into. XR also includes artificial intelligence, which I know is a big thing right now in the film industry. Also, virtual production sort of sits under VR, AR, XR environments too. And so, yeah, my hope is that in the emerging tech space, I don't want anyone to feel intimidated to approach this space because they don't have a technical background. This space needs just as many storytellers, artists, creatives, lawyers, activists, world changers, visionaries as any other industry.
Mara?
I love hearing everybody's stories. I work alone. Like it's me in my studio with like an X-Acto knife and paper. So, and I love that. And I come from a visual arts background. So I think I said this in my little talk, like I've been playing with animation for about 5 years, but I studied photography. And up until about 5 years ago, would have told you that I was a photographer. And then now I find myself making animations, and also have been teaching for 20 years. So I think, so making moving things is really exciting for me. So it's very memorable to be like, I think that the thought process that goes along with trying to figure out how I'm going to say something and then also how I'm going to make something move. Just trying to figure that out is really exciting to me and really fun. So I find that really, I guess, if that would be a memorable moment in making this. I think I had, there's an oil rig in the last scene that I was like, how am I going to make this move? And I watched a lot of videos on oil rigs and how they moved and the engineering of them. And I was like, I think I could do it. So figuring those kinds of things out are pretty memorable. But in the, I think people's reactions to the piece are probably my most memorable, the memorable parts. And I'll share a little story. So my family is fairly conservative politically, and I sort of the outlier. And so the animation that I made exists with an entire, like a whole body of work. So there's like a series of collages that go with it and a bunch of like giant cardboard cutouts and some other animations that I had made for TikTok, viral dance animations, because information is its own monster. And so that was my way to participate in that. And this was back in July, or late June, early July. And my mother and sister decided that they wanted to come up to see the show. And I was very nervous about it because we don't agree on a lot of things. And before we went, I was talking to them about it because I just wanted to sort of prepare them for it. It's a difficult subject matter. It's a difficult piece. I'm not saying anything new. We're all living through this. We all know what's going on, but it's a recontextualization of sort of my experiences of this. And so I had this conversation with my sister and she said, well, I feel like it's your political leaning and that you hate men. And I was like, okay, no, yes, I'm a feminist. I feel very strongly about that. I've done some activism work in my state. I taught gender and women's studies. It's very important to me. But I don't hate men. I'm married to a man. I'm a heterosexual woman. I'm married to men. I have met male friends. I respect, but I do think men kind of screwed up this world. And we're watching that. And then her discomfort with the creatures, right? With the monsters, they are supposed to be uncomfortable, and having to explain that, like, yeah, your discomfort in looking at them is exactly what I'm trying to do. Like, I want you to be uncomfortable. And she was like, oh, so then I took them to the gallery to see the piece and the show. And my sister, actually, she's a school teacher, and the gun scene really got to her, and she came out teary. And, we talked about it, and we've been talking about it since then. And she said, it's not political. It's really like human. It's really kind of what we're all experiencing. And that made me feel like I did something right. I mean, I certainly like approach everything from my lens of a liberal person. But that I could affect somebody who doesn't think like me felt very memorable and important to me. So I think that's probably my most memorable thing coming out of making this piece.
You did a good job conveying all those different messages, to get people to think
Oh, well,
about
thank you.
different issues.
Now I'll add that to the list of memorable things. Thank you.
Lastly, if you guys can tell us what, if you have any projects that's upcoming, or things that you're working on currently, and where people can connect with you and find you.
Yeah, so my husband and creative partner Matt and I are making our first horror film this year. We go into production in November. We're so excited to really dive into the genre space. Big horror fans, so we're finally taking it into our own hands. But yeah, our film is called Clifton Park, and it's about theaters, sex cults, and gaslighting. So it's going to be a fun piece to explore in November. And we are One Eyed Rabbit. That's our production company. So you can find us at www.one-eyed-rabbit.com. On Instagram, we're at @1_eyed rabbit. You can find me at Marin Lavelle, and Matt is at The Marvelous Mr. Matt on Instagram.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next?
Elias, shall we talk about our projects? Do you want to talk about The Nightingale?
Yeah, we have a few actually on the go, don't we? We have Alicia and I developing a few different projects. A feature film called with the working title of The Nightingale, which is sort of a period piece. It's sort of psychological horror. It's semi-based on true events, set in colonial Morocco, and it focuses on, it's sort of taking a very sensationalistic story from that period about a sort of dancer turned madame turned serial killer. During that period, she was an informant for the French colonial powers at the time, and then was Moulay El Hassan, and it was a big story at the time, and it was covered by the press in as far afield as the States. France, a very famous writer called Colette wrote about her, but it was always through this sort of Orientalist lens, and it was always very sensationalist. So we're trying to take this incredibly sensationalist story and tell it in a sort of more nuanced fashion, maintaining some sort of horror tropes, but exploring broader themes of, personal responsibility in the context of this colonial period, colonial violence, and just sort of portray the world that this individual lived in. It's a fascinating story, but and then we're also sort of hoping to use some of the technology of that period to give it a layer of authenticity, and there are some surrealist elements, but Alicia and I actually have quite a few projects that we're working together, so yeah, it's just sort of like which one will take off next sort of thing, which is very exciting.
Thank you. Mara? Oh, where can we find you? On Instagram?
Oh.
Or your website?
So my Instagram is dar_Ilias, ELIAS, House of Ilias. But then I have a website, Ilias-Suhail, SUHAIL.com. And all the projects even the work in progress projects are listed there as well. and Adij will give you more. You have your what's your website, Adij?
My first and surname, arijalsultan.com. I'm putting everything on the chat. It's easier. There we go.
And Michaela? Oh, she's on. Oh, Mara's. Oh, okay. Mara?
Did you want me to talk? I'm sorry.
Yes, that's okay.
I got all excited about everybody putting their info in the chat, so I didn't have to write it down. So before I made the monsters, I had made a superhero who was going to come and save the world. And I know that's kind of easy and simplistic, but maybe that's just what we need right now. Maybe it's just what I need. So there's a superhero. I think that Among Us is probably part one and maybe a trilogy, because I sort of have images and images and sort of moving things for the next two pieces. So in the next one, it's going to be about my superhero, woman, alien creature, and what happens on her world, as well as book bans going on, because I have a lot of concerns about the banning of books in the United States. It really makes me mad. It's crazy. It's like, and I think about the whole book banning movement as a way to stop people from empathizing each other, because what we get from reading books about people who are different than us is we start to empathize with them, and that's so important. So that there's going to be that, and then the third iteration is going to be the monsters are going to be creating havoc, and my superhero, who has all the superpowers in the world, really likes to use her brain to fix things. And so quirky, kind of funny in a similar style. So there'll be the monsters creating havoc, and then she's going to come in and fix everything, and hopefully quirky and funny ways. And I will put my information in the chat, but my website is maratrachtenberg.net, and my Instagram handle is maratrack art. If anybody's on TikTok, it is fun. There's a lot of weird things going on TikTok.
Last but not least.
Yeah, so Reimagined Volume 2 Mahal, it is a part of a series. Reimagined is a fully female produced and female directed VR animated series where we retell mythologies and cultures and fairy tales from all over the world. Reimagined Volume 1 Nisa is about Brothers Grimm, was directed by my co-creator of the series, Julie Cavalier. Reimagined Volume 2 Mahal, Philippine mythology, directed by me. Reimagined Volume 3, I cannot give too much away, but I can tell you we are currently in production, and we have a guest director, Melissa Joyner, who is retelling a Southern Nigerian folktale. So that is currently where my brain is at, is making sure the trilogy sort of gets wrapped up, and we have a really strong third volume to kind of bring us home, as they say. Outside of Reimagined, I work as an impact producer on social impact and social impact nonfiction projects. So currently working with a project called Body of Mine, which is all about gender euphoria and puts you into different bodies, into different genders, into different shapes, using full tracking of your eyes, your arms, your elbows, your ankles, and your pelvis. And I am still on this Mahal festival journey, which is incredible. Mahal is premiering its Asia Pacific premiere next month at South by Southwest Sydney, and then it will go on to have its Philippine premiere at the Bakunawa Festival, as well as our LA premiere at the Filipino American Creative Festival. And my goal with these festivals is hopefully to find a little bit of funding to see if somebody would be willing to either localize Mahal into Tagalog or some other Philippine dialect. Maybe work with us to see if we can export Mahal as a traditional 2D animated film. We could go back into the engine, reshoot the whole film, optimize it for 2D, because right now it's optimized for VR. And then another goal of mine is maybe to even spin off this IP as its own standalone series of 2D animated shorts. You can find me at my name. I'm just actually going to rename myself because that might be a little easier. My name's a little long. It's Michaela Ternaski Holland. My website is just myname.com. My Instagram is just my name, Michaela Ternowski Holland. And then my Twitter is a little different, or X is what we're calling it. I'm Michaela TH. I'm also on TikTok as my name, but I'm not as active on TikTok, but I'm happy to, connect with everyone in whatever platform feels best for them. I also don't want to ever be a wall. So if you're interested in getting involved in VR, AR, please feel free to reach out to me through my website. There's a contact page, or you can take my email down. It's hello@MichaelaTernowskiHolland.com.
Thank you, guys. This was wonderful. Thank you for spending your time with us and to learn a little bit more about you guys and the projects as well. The films will be up until October 1st. So please, go online on SparkFest, check out some great films. And once again, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.